So it was the first summer of ever working out in the pursuit of muscle and strength for me back when I was around 14 years old. And I made one of the biggest mistakes that almost everybody makes when it comes to trying to build muscle and strength with bodyweight training, in that I started off nice and slow and I was only doing like 10, 15 push-ups each night before bed. But then I thought, okay, I need to keep progressing this in some way. So I added a set in the morning when I woke up, and then a set at lunch, and then an extra set in all 3 of those times, and more reps and more sets. And by the end of the summer, I was doing hundreds of push-ups, and my joints were inflamed, I was losing motivation, and I was making a little bit of progress, but it certainly wasn't worth the amount of effort that I was investing. And because of that, by the end of that summer, I just basically burned out and quit. And hence, I failed to learn one of the most important lessons, not just in building muscle and strength with bodyweight training, but just building muscle and strength at all, which is that, yes, adding volume is good, and that is certainly a progressive strategy. But if you really want the best chance of building yourself up, you have to add resistance to your working muscles as a primary strategy for progressive overload. So, okay then, that means time to slap on the dip belt or the weight vest and physically add weight and therefore resistance to our working muscles. That's obviously the ideal or best way to go about doing this. But weighted calisthenics may not be a viable option for a lot of people. It doesn't have that simplicity and minimalism that a lot of people are attracted to with bodyweight training in the first place. They may not have the equipment, and it doesn't quite lend itself to that whole efficiency and portability because you've got weight and you've got all this other stuff. So if you're into bodyweight training for the portability factor, then it kind of compromises some of those other benefits. Hence the need for progressive calisthenics. And progressive calisthenics is where we still add extra resistance and weight to the working muscles, only instead of adding it to our physical body, we shift it from one part of our body to the other. So instead of having my weight 50-50 between my two hands, now we're going more onto one arm. But that poses another challenge in and of itself. It's called the Calisthenics Rut, which is basically where we have one particular way that we do basic exercises, like push-ups here, for example, and this kind of gets locked into our mind as the basic, standard, #1 preferable way to do the exercise. And as a result, we stay with one technique, and we kind of get stuck there. So that poses a very serious problem, because if we're adjusting our weight and therefore our resistance on the working muscle by our technique, but you always keep using or primarily using the same technique, well, that's kind of fundamentally like going to a dumbbell rack or a store and saying, I want to get big and strong, and I'm only going to lift this 35-pound dumbbell for everything indefinitely, and I'm never going heavier. Sure, I can add sets, sure, I can go slower and do more reps and stuff, but ultimately, if I'm never adding actual resistance, I'm gonna be severely handicapping my potential, which is exactly what happens with the calisthenics rut. So, okay, great, need to add more resistance, need to put my weight. So, all right, then that means from push-ups, I just go to one-arm push-ups, and well, that didn't work out so well. And that's because going from using both limbs to using one limb right off the bat, that's like saying going from 135 on the bench press to 315 in one jump. It's too big of a step. So here are the top exercises I've long used with my clients to get out of the calisthenics rut and keep moving you forward for building muscle and strength with progressive calisthenics. So the first place I recommend folks start off is going from kind of a standard hand width with your push-ups, pull-ups, and so on, to more of a narrow position. This gives you the ability to get used to having your hands working much closer to your center line, pulling the shoulders down and back, keeping everything nice and tight, and not having any sort of joint issues, while also improving your mobility. And you don't need to go from here to here in one shot. You can simply move narrower than what is normal for you and progress that way with pushing and pulling exercises. The same goes for squat techniques. If you're always squatting with a standard bodyweight squat, which is fine, you're always going to be limited. So moving to a more narrow type squat, or even fairly close squat, can give you that feeling of what it's like to have your knees closer to your center line without bowing outwards and having good hip control and stability, that's going to unlock a lot more potential for you. I also highly recommend shift work. This is part of grind style calisthenics for a good reason. It builds stability, it builds mobility and control, but it also gets you used to having all of your weight shift from one limb to the next. And that gets you more used to having that body position without having to go into the full exercise. So I'm loading up my left leg as much as I can, my quads, glutes, everything is engaged. This leg is just simply kind of supporting me. So it's getting me comfortable with that type of position and resistance while also allowing me to get a feel for what's tight and what's kind of holding me back from being able to shift my weight from one limb to the other. And then finally, you can play around with shifting just a little bit more weight onto one arm or the other. It doesn't have to be a very drastic weight shift to add just a little more resistance to the working muscles in that one limb. So for example, commando pull-ups are a very common exercise that I give folks, where I have just a little bit more weight on my left arm than on my right. And it's a step up from classic close grip pull-ups, but not so much that it's going to be very overloading the joints or feel like it's impossible. And lastly, don't forget that we're trying to change our mindset about how we're using our body. So if you get to a point where you're primarily doing your lunges and your squats on one leg like this is your main event for leg training, or at least for some of my clients it is. We're not doing squats like this unless we're warming up or working out some kinks or doing something of a drop set. This squat is almost completely absent from their repertoire as far as their main strength exercise, but this, being much more of a challenge due to more resistance, is primarily what they're working on about 80% of the time. So add that resistance to continue building muscle and strength in your calisthenics training, either with weighted or progressive calisthenics. You could check out my latest book, Progressive and Weighted Calisthenics, for all of the information I wish I knew back in the day on how to continue to build muscle and strength beyond just endless volume when it comes to bodyweight training. And let me know if you like this shit, hit the like, shares, and all that sort of thing. Greatly does help grow the channel, and I sincerely appreciate it. Talk to you next time. Till then, be fit and live free.